A new report tabled in Parliament shows that while CSIS was warning the Trudeau government of foreign interference by China, some in Trudeau's office outright dismissed the claims. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, why would something this serious simply be dismissed?
A difference of opinion between CSIS and the National Security Advisor for the Prime Minister. What's shocking to me, Hal, is that this came out, as you mentioned, in a report tabled by Parliament. But why didn't it come out at the public inquiry? Was this talked about behind closed doors and we don't know? This is news to me. This is news to the people who cover this even more intently than I do. Uh, Someone in Trudeau's office, and it appears it was his national security advisor, who at the time was a man named David Morrison, received the reports from CSIS and simply dismissed what he was being told as normal diplomatic activities. Uh, Trying to rig nomination contest for the sitting governing political party is not and should not be considered normal diplomatic activities. Here's the real problem. David Morrison moved on from being the acting National Security and Intelligence Advisor and is now one of the top bureaucrats at Foreign Affairs. Melanie Joly recently dispatched him to China to try and smooth things over, to improve the relationship. This is a man who clearly has a blind spot for China. I'm not comfortable with him being in that sort of position that he's in now, given his past.
Brian, Immigration Minister Mark Miller recently announced he was extending who gets to be a Canadian. Now, citizenship will go 2 generations born outside of the country. And the Trudeau Liberals say the courts forced them to do this, but what, you're not buying that, are you?
No, because it's right in their news release that that's not what happened. It was a lower court ruling. It was the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. First level court. I'm not dismissing the judges there. I'm not dismissing the judgments that come out of that court. But this sort of thing is regularly, if this sort of ruling comes out, governments will often challenge it. And they'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court to get a final ruling. In the government's own news release, they stated that they were not and did not appeal that ruling that came out last December because they agree with the ruling. So this is a political choice. This is a policy choice to say that citizenship extends to 2 generations born outside of the country. I'm born here. Let's say I had a kid in the States, and then that kid had a kid in the States. The grandchild of mine could get Canadian citizen or would get Canadian citizenship automatically. Now, there are some countries where you can apply to get citizenship, but it is not automatic. And other countries where you outright don't get it because of your grandparents. The United States, for example, or in my case, my parents were born in the UK. I was born here. I could have citizenship, but my kids would actually have to apply for it. It is not automatic in the UK. It is not automatic in many European countries, including France, Italy, and elsewhere. So we're a bit of an outlier here, and I think it cheapens citizenship. But the Trudeau Liberals, they've been doing a lot of moves on that front.
Now, Brian, the reports also say the Trudeau government is looking into giving citizenship to people here illegally. Is this a way to maybe generate more votes for the Liberal Party?
Well, quite possibly. If you wanted to be cynical about it, and I have no reason not to be cynical about it, they've extended voting to people who don't even live in the country anymore. You get to live in the last riding that you were in. I'm sorry, I thought you voted for your MP based on the fact that you live in that particular place and they represent you in Parliament. The Liberals keep extending who is a Canadian, who gets to vote, in ways that they hope will benefit them. And so this move that is apparently going before the Prime Minister and Cabinet soon was meant to give citizenship to some people. Estimates vary, 500,000 or more who've been here for years, many in the construction industry, for example, that they would get citizenship. They could apply for it. Others, it would be some of the international students that are here, the 900,000 who have overstayed their visa. If you overstay your visa, you're here illegally. Well, they can just apply to be citizens now, even though they should have left the country. Failed refugee claimants. We know that with the influx of people across Roxham Road, or more recently at airports, many of these people that come in claiming asylum are actually economic migrants who are trying to skip the queue. And therefore, they're rejected because they're not actually fleeing persecution. They would be able to benefit from this. It's a very strange system. And as you say, one that is most likely just about them trying to shore up votes, which the Liberals desperately need at this point.
Brian, Immigration Minister Mark Miller also says 5,000 people will be allowed into Canada from Gaza. Now, is this similar to the 2016 Syrian refugee program? Also, how can we ensure that these 5,000 will be vetted properly and that a few who may be Hamas terrorists won't be slipping through the cracks?
Both very good questions. This is supposed to be different than the Syrian refugee crisis of 2016. There, we brought in more than 25,000 people, and we were bringing people here to live, to escape the war zone. And by the way, conflict still continues there. Things are not good in Syria. But this program, they're talking about bringing people here temporarily. And so when the fighting stops, whenever that may be, they would go back. Um, eh, I'm not sure that's going to happen. If people come here and they set up new lives, a good chunk of them are most likely going to stay. But as far as vetting, that's a question that really needs to be answered. And Minister Miller was not clear when asked about that. He said there would be fingerprinting and there would be attempts to do security checks. Uh, you obviously can't rely on the word of the government in Gaza. That's Hamas, a terrorist group. He was asked, "Are you going to be checking and vetting people with the assistance of the Israeli government?" He declined to answer that. He simply said he would, be using additional partners. Uh, we have to be careful on this and ensure that we aren't bringing in people who are Hamas members who took part in the October 7th terrorist attacks or other terrorist attacks. We need to make sure that doesn't happen. And it's going to be very difficult. And in 2016, the Liberals had to be forced, they had to be shamed into doing the security vetting before people came. First, they weren't going to do any security vetting. Then they said, and of course, in that case in Syria, there were multiple factions, including ISIS, fighting there. And so you had to do security vetting so that you weren't bringing actual refugees and the people that the refugees were fleeing from on the same plane. So initially they said no security vetting. Then they said, we'll bring them all to CFB Trenton and then we'll vet them once they're in Canada. Well, of course, you can't kick anybody out once they're in Canada. The charter will apply. So they don't have a good track record on this. Their instincts aren't good on this. So we'll want to keep a close eye. At this point, there aren't many details that they're telling us, though.
There appears to be more pressure on Canada to increase its defense spending, Brian. That includes 23 American senators writing to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asking Canada to get a little bit closer to that 2% spending target. So just how bad is it right now?
We're well below the 2% spending target, and we have no plans to hit that spending target. Right now, we're only ahead of Spain, Belgium, and Luxembourg in terms of defense spending. I'm glad we're ahead of Luxembourg there, Hal, but we're well behind other NATO allies, including the UK, France, Poland, Germany, other NATO countries that are pulling their weight. And I'm not surprised that American senators have written, remember when Donald Trump was president, there were an awful lot of Canadians who thought, oh, why is Trump raising this issue about NATO spending? This is just Trump and right wing. Every American president has raised this issue. Barack Obama raised it while speaking to a joint session of Parliament in the House of Commons years ago. He said that we weren't doing enough. This is an old complaint from the Americans. Now NATO itself is leaning heavy on Canada, and the Trudeau government shows no signs of wanting to get anywhere near the 2% mark.
Brian, there's been some talk in Ottawa about the upcoming U.S. federal election in November. The Trudeau government is allegedly preparing for another Trump presidency. So how close is the race right now between Trump and Biden? What are the polls telling us?
I follow a few websites that track all the polls. One of them, 270towin.com. They've got them within a point or two of each other. I think it's about 1.5, 1.4% separating them nationally. A real unknown is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and what he will do in this race. And will he impact Trump more than Biden or Biden more than Trump? That remains an unknown. And not all the polls are asking about him. So in November, we could get a surprise on that front. But what's interesting is nationally, Trump has a slight lead. You go into some of the swing states and you start seeing, like, Georgia went for the Democrats last time. It had gone to Trump in 2016. Um, he's ahead in Georgia now, Arizona, places like Wisconsin. It's gone back and forth. Michigan leaning more towards Trump, but tightening. So there is a very good chance of a second Trump presidency, which is why I've been saying it's a bad idea that Justin Trudeau has been campaigning against Pierre Poilievre using Donald Trump. We could be in a situation where there's almost a full year of Trudeau and Trump having to work with each other after Trudeau's spent so much time attacking Donald Trump. Bad move.
And you say that neither Trump nor Biden are good for Canada's economy, and we kind of need a little bit of a different posture in Ottawa. Can you explain?
Well, both of them are protectionist, and I look at American politics from a view of what's good for the Canadian economy, and both of them are not against imposing tariffs on Canada or Joe Biden's used the Inflation Reduction Act. I know a lot of people are angry about these tax credits that go to the electric vehicle manufacturers. That's there because Joe Biden put similar proposals inside his Inflation Reduction Act to try and get all of the auto production to move to the US. He was trying to get it out of Canada into the United States. But Donald Trump has tried to, shut the border to Canadian goods at times. Biden, no better. He's increased softwood lumber tariffs. He's looking right now at something that would really hurt ranchers straight across Alberta. And that is country of origin labeling. They're calling it by a different name now, but it means the same thing. So both of these gentlemen are very protectionist. We need to get to a point where we're treating them both the same. Instead, the Trudeau government treated Trump like an enemy and Biden like a friend. We need to just realize that whoever's elected, they're going to be there to look after the American people, and that's their job, and look after the American economy. We need to have a constant presence in Washington explaining that shutting the border to Canadian goods and services is bad for the American economy and explaining why. And we can't just do it when there's Republicans in the White House. We should be doing it even more when Democrats are in the White House because they're even more protectionist.
You know, you put country of origin labeling on a lot of the beef, and a lot of people know that Alberta beef is some of the best in the world. So there you go. That's actually a blessing. Come on.
I have long thought that we should be marketing it that way, but the way that our system is now, it gets either finished and or processed in the United States and then just gets labeled as USA beef. And if that happens, they're going to get cut out of that processing. We don't have the processing capacity in Canada right now.
Brian, let's circle back to Canadian politics for just a moment. Let's talk about some of the polls. Last time we chatted, Pierre Poilievre was up by 20 points over the Trudeau Liberals. Where does it stand right now? And can the Conservatives maintain the momentum heading into next year's federal election?
Well, the momentum started to kick off about a year ago. If you remember, to about a year ago, the parties were still relatively close. And then over the summer, over the late spring and summer, the Conservatives started to grow and grow and grow. And it's been a double-digit lead since sometime in the fall. I don't have the full chart in front of me, but a double-digit lead since then. For the past several months, it's been a 15 to, I think the largest lead now has been a 22-point lead. But it is settled in there of high teens to 20s for probably 2 months or more at this point. So, uh, that's the question people keep asking me. Can Pierre Poilievre keep up the momentum? In some ways, I'm not sure he has to. Governments, to a large degree, defeat themselves. Now, you have to show up and show that you're ready and able to take over. Uh, but in some ways, Poilievre could go quiet for a little while and, or, be a little quieter and probably still just be cruising along. He doesn't need to be out there and in the faces of Canadians each and every day, which he hasn't been. But I'm just saying, like, Trudeau is not helping himself at this point. We had that big spending budget. We had the class warfare with the capital gains tax. None of that has worked. And by the way, that capital gains tax legislation still hasn't shown up. It wasn't in the Budget Implementation Act. They still haven't tabled legislation to bring it in. and we're less than a month. We're May 28th. It's supposed to take effect June 25th, and they haven't even introduced a bill. So there's no way this bill will pass before the Liberals say that the tax will take effect.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.